Hello, greetings from South Africa. I've been in Cape Town for the last month or so now, and wow, it's absolutely beautiful. So in this video, I want to talk to you about what to do when you're stuck. And I've done a few videos on this, but I think it's a really, really important topic and a really useful topic, because let's be honest, if we're scrolling around on YouTube looking for inspiration, chances are there is something or some aspect of our lives that's stuck, and we're looking for a bit of inspiration or a tool or something that we can engage with to shift our circumstances. And so the first thing I want to share, and it came just from a very simple conversation with my friend earlier on today, where I was like, I'm a little bit lost with regards to what to do next in a certain category of my life. And he turned to me, and I know this is shared in so many different parables, but it is so bloody useful. And he was like, well, you don't really know where you're going in the bigger picture. And I was like, yeah, with regards to this aspect of my life. And he goes, do you know what the next step is? Do you know what you could what's a bit of low-hanging fruit, perhaps what you could do for where you are right now? And I was like, yeah, well, I kind of know one or two things that I could do to improve my circumstances, but I don't know, ultimately speaking, where they're going to lead me. And so obviously the encouragement was, well, just do them. And as we step a little bit further on our journey, we see a little bit further, and the next step naturally presents itself. And there's a great trust in that. We instinctively want to think that we know so well, and we need to know where we're going kind of first and map out the journey from there. But I think there is a inner wisdom that is guiding us at all times. And if we can release that need to know where exactly we're going and what it's going to look like, and actually just follow the steps that are always there immediately speaking in front of us. So I would argue that anyone who's stuck, there is always an obvious move in front of them. It might not be taking them obviously where they want to go, but it will take them that little bit further. And if they only took that step, another step would present itself. And so for whoever's watching this, if you are in that somewhat similar position where you don't know, ultimately speaking, where you want to go, I would encourage you to just look at your immediate surroundings and look at your environment and think, well, what could you do for where you are to improve your circumstances? What could you do that might be helpful, immediately speaking, for where you are? And to have faith that if you do that, another step forward from there will present itself once you've completed it. And that if you keep following that path, my belief is that ultimately speaking, actually you will end up in somewhere far beyond whatever it is that you could imagine for yourself. Because I do really believe we very often underappreciate what's possible for us and what's capable. And for those that do set their goals and their ambitions, I actually, generally speaking, think that the challenge or the problem that most suffer from is that they set their goals too small or too low. Whereas with this approach of just doing the best we can, essentially for where we are, and taking the obvious moves forward in the present tense, I actually think that, ultimately speaking, leads us to a better point. So that's kind of like my first little note. Yeah, that's the kind of the first point that I wanted to kind of iron out. The second is that oftentimes when people are stuck, they're actually really overwhelmed, and they're overwhelmed because they've complicated things. And that's a natural human instinct. We think we need to work hard for whatever it is that we want. And we, generally speaking, seem to lean into more complicated solutions rather than easy ones. Einstein said it so well. He said, if you don't know it well enough, you can't explain it simply enough. And real, true intellect is actually brings easier solutions. So for me, what I find is that sometimes, through perhaps taking our foot off the pedal a little bit, and perhaps eye off the ball, we can complicate our worlds through compromise, through silly decisions. And we have the capacity, normally speaking, to hold a couple of bad decisions, to hold a couple of complexities. But if we aren't attentive to addressing these, they can get on top of us and they can grind us to a halt. And we can find ourselves just so overwhelmed because, God Almighty, it's it's too hard. And this comes up, with the best intentions in the world. Sometimes people set ridiculous morning routines for themselves with nothing but good intentions, but before they know it, it actually becomes a little bit too complicated to even get out of bed in the mornings, and so they stay in. Or, in a relationship with a partner or a friend, too many compromises are fostered, and you've bitten your tongue too many times that it actually becomes impossible to relax. You're constantly kind of on guard and conducting yourself in this kind of awkward fashion to please others, but it actually becomes just impossible for you to navigate and to engage with anyone, because you're held too tightly in compromise. I think that's actually kind of worth almost taking a moment just to think about all the times you've bit your tongue, or gone with somebody else's way of wanting to do things, and played yourself out of comfort, and played yourself out of the way would work best for yourself. And we can do that on a select basis, and it can be nice to do that on a select basis, but if we do it a little bit too much, and it's very, very easy to find yourself doing it too much, suddenly it just becomes really fatiguing and exhausting, to the point that, again, you get overwhelmed and you find it, it's easier just not to engage with that person anymore. It's easier not to do that anymore. But unfortunately, you start to box yourself into your world. So for me, what I would highly encourage is that in every engagement, in everything you do, you challenge yourself on a repeating basis, because as you make on a repeating basis, to make things easier, to ask yourself a question with regards to anything that you're about to do. How could I make this easier? And what I find is that, like, for whatever I might be doing, let's say it's back to the morning routine example. If I go through a morning routine and I ask myself or reflect on it and think, how could I make this morning routine easier? Still as effective, but easier to go through. Chances are I will think of one or two little improvements. And then the next time I do it and repeat it, I'll probably think of another couple of improvements, until a month or two later, it's completely unrecognizable, but immeasurably better. That philosophy applies itself to all aspects of life, everything you're doing and the people you're engaging with. You might think to yourself, after you've hung out with a friend or a partner, how could I make hanging out that little bit easier? Is there a conversation that needs to be had? A little challenge? And I'll give the example of any time we're in a state of conflict with a friend. Things get so awkward and it's hard to engage with them. It's easier just to be away from them. But then you come together and you have a tough conversation. You perhaps say the things that needed to be said. Suddenly your shoulders drop. You can relax. And in actual fact, more often than not, you enjoy a better quality of relationship with that person afterwards. So this is true, as I said, in all aspects of life, that if you challenge yourself proactively to think, how can I make things easier? How could I make things simpler? How could this be more peaceful for going forward? You will get all these little ideas or suggestions for improving your circumstances. And that's a really, really good place to start. So if you're feeling stuck, it could be because of that. And that approach, for me, has brought enormous growth and also ease. And then excitement. And what I find that flows from that is, generally speaking, I get more ambitious for myself. I realize a more efficient morning routine, and I'm like, wow, what other aspects of my life could I improve and enjoy improvements like this? Or when it comes to relationships, I'm like, wow, after a few times of asking myself, how can I make this better? How could I make this more peaceful? How could I make this easier? And I see the impacts of that in that relationship. It makes me ambitious to be like, wow, well, I've done it in this relationship, let's do it in another, and let's perhaps create some more. So it's amazing that when we start making our lives more peaceful, easier, simpler, our lives start to actually really move and take off, and that can be unbelievable. And the third point to this is that, sometimes when we're stuck as a result of perhaps being a little bit too easy on ourselves. And I have this great belief that the greater at which we respect ourselves, the more in which that's reflected in how others respect us. And sometimes if we've been a little bit easy on ourselves, and we perhaps haven't been looking after ourselves as well as we should, we perhaps haven't been as sensitive to others in terms of like showing up on time, meeting people where they're at, and taking ourselves seriously, taking our ambitions seriously, taking care of ourselves properly. When we perhaps let ourselves down in that regard, people instinctively follow suit. And we can find opportunities not opening up for us, people thinking less of us, and doors being harder to open. And so sometimes that can grind you to a halt also. And so for me, a big one is to just look in the mirror and think, where are the areas in my life that I should be raising my standards? There's a great quote, I say it so often, from Tony Robbins. He says, if you want to change your circumstances, raise your standards. And that is just so strong for me. And so what I find is that, when I'm stuck, when things aren't moving as I like, there is such a want to blame others. There's such a want to be frustrated with the world and all that. But if I look in the mirror and I really audit, how am I looking after myself? How are my standards? How's my sense of essentially self-respect? Where could I raise the bar? And when I often just work on myself, I'm amazed at how quickly my outside environment starts to reflect the change, and doors start to open up, opportunities start to come my way. And that can be an incredible catalyst for change. So those are kind of three, I would say, the kind of mindset shifts that I wanted to share with you for anyone that's feeling stuck, and anyone that wants to kind of bring a bit of energy, bring a bit of excitement to their current circumstance. I hope they're valuable to you. They have all been so bloody valuable to me. And if you're watching this, if you've got this far, that's quite a challenge in YouTube when there's so much bloody distraction out there. But if you've got this far and you are feeling stuck, I just highly encourage you, please do lean in. These philosophies might sound or seem really simple, but it's the simplest things that oftentimes work the best. And so I really wish that these work well for you. And if you do apply them, if you do use them, please do let me know how you get on. Feel free to reach out to me on Instagram, probably the platform that I'm most active on, or in the comments below. And likewise, if anybody else has any kind of advice that they'd share and that they'd apply, if they're feeling stuck, that works well for them, please do share them. Hopefully, like my love and desire with this is that it's so nice just to share knowledge, experience, value out blindly. I have no idea who watches this, but the thought that this might help somebody for wherever they might be in their journey, that feels really, really good. And so hopefully you can enjoy the same benefit too. Anyways, I have waffled on for long enough now. I am so grateful for you engaging with this content, and I will look forward to sharing again with you soon. Thank you.